that's what it is?
Which one, over here?
No, these guys over here. That's who thug with the folks.
Don't
Hey, which angle? Which side?
You call it, Lauren. Which one do you want?
Well, I think I'll go with this one. You get the fact.
It's a little bit too happy. You ready, G? Okay, we're gonna have to shout a little bit of noise. Why don't you come up right here, okay? That way you don't have to shout.
You won't bite.
All right. My name is Kenny Bruno.
They're probably going to ratify, but we want them to ban, to support a total ban of exports to non-OECD countries. And join the rest of the world. About 105 countries have signed on to the Basel Convention, have ratified, and want the U.S. to join the rest of the countries. We are also urging for support of the Towns Bill that is going to be on Friday. Greenpeace and other environmental organizations and representatives Richardson and Towns are having a press conference to release the Towns Bill, which is calling for a total ban of the export of hazardous waste. We are calling for support of that. And if the U.S. signs onto the Towns Bill, what Borden is doing and what other companies are doing would not have happened if they had passed legislation to ban the export of hazardous waste. That would not have happened. So we are saying stop it now, stop it everywhere, and support a total ban of the export of hazardous waste. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Still in the
NJ-OKI, NJ-BHU, NJ-BHU.
And where are you from? Are you from South?
I'm from Kenya. but I work in the agriculture treatment. Richardson and Towns. There's a press conference on Friday where this TOWNS.
Yeah, but I call it
Towns and Richardson.
Ed Towns.
Oh, it's
His first name?
yeah. He was submitting a bill to Congress which would call for a total ban of hazardous.
Okay, Ramona?
I'm Ramona Stevens, and Lean is here to support the mission of waste reduction and pollution prevention. A lot of the chemical companies are claiming that they are doing pollution prevention when they're not. They may be recycling, but recycling is not pollution prevention. Pollution prevention is just what it says, preventing the pollution in the first place. TRI numbers have jumped from 92, they're 4.3% higher than the 91 numbers. TRI, toxic release inventory numbers. And that's as a whole. 4.3% higher. Pollution prevention and source reduction, major source reduction efforts must occur across the board throughout the nation and the world. Gardens has been telling us that they're recycling this waste and bringing it back to the United States to reuse it. They seem to claim that it's pollution prevention. It is not. Now we find out that they're not even recycling. Something's got to be done about it. The industry has got to straighten up and do real source reduction and pollution prevention. It worries me that it's going to be stored here, but I'd rather see it stored here properly than over there and no telling what's going on with it. But it's got to be disposed of or recycled, and really recycled if it's going to be recycled.
I'm Paula Henderson with Citizen Action, and we have a lot of problems here in Louisiana, but we're here today to talk about the fact that people are realizing that inefficient industrial processes do indeed have global repercussions. It's time for us to take moral and legal responsibilities for the problems that we're creating and shipping around the world. Here in Louisiana, and particularly in this area, people have been fighting for a long time because we live with the problems every day that are caused by environmental injustice, where we see that small communities, people who are traditionally economically and politically disenfranchised are basically being dumped on. And we've very successfully learned how to have a voice, get together, and get some changes made in those effects. We hear Bill Clinton talking a lot these days about environmental democracy. We just need to remember that environmental democracy does not stop at our borders, that we are responsible for other people, our neighbors around the world, and we shouldn't be putting people in a position. People in any country should never have to choose between poverty and poison, and that's a lot of times what our industrial practices are doing. So we're pleased that Borden has made the gesture of recalling this shipment, but it just brings it home again that indeed this hazardous waste is going to be coming right back to the area where it was produced. And the environmentalists have been accused a lot of only getting upset when it's a problem of not in my backyard. Well, in this case, I think the reversal is true. We're here to say, YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, bring it on back home. We've got to deal with the problem here. It's time to force this company to take responsibility for either cleaning up its production processes so that we're not dealing with this kind of waste, or to think about actually phasing out the production and use of PVCs that originates this process here. So I think it's good. We've got to deal with it right here and not shove it under the carpet someplace else.
Thank you.
Hi, Frank Bonifay with Swamp Wildlife Refuge and Botanical Gardens, approximately 2 miles away from this plant here. As we understand, there are 2 workers that are seriously ill with 9-member families. No one's providing for them. We have 1 worker that is dead. Iberville, Ascension, and East Baton Rouge has prevailing winds 5 out of 12 months of the year blowing over our homes and our families. If this has taken place in South Africa, what is happening to our communities? This is irresponsible industry, it seems. We call for criminal charges to those who are proven guilty. We hope that we can call also for fence line monitors that are independent of industry, that alert the community when there are problems, unlike the past. These are people just like your families, my family. We ask, do these managers of this industry that we see, that we feel that is irresponsible, do they have a conscience? Do they love their children and their family? Well, these people in South Africa love their children and their family. But we call for them to look at their children and their family and to stand up and do what is right. Thank you.
Frank, you're from this area. You also want them to bring everything back. You feel better about that?
I feel that it is necessary for industry to take care of their own problems. You do not ship a problem to another community. You take care of the problem and you make sure that you improve on the problems that are in the future. You do not allow the continuation of what I see as murder.
Spell your last name.
B-O-N-I-F-A-Y, Bonifay.
Okay. Just before we wrap up, this story is obviously not over because there are these thousands of barrels sitting in a warehouse in South Africa. And the whole pretext, the legal basis for them exporting this material has been that it's being recycled. It's not being recycled. And so what we're going to hear next, I'm quite sure, is that the DEQ will have to consider reinstating compliance and penalty orders against Gordon for improperly handling toxic waste, which was not defined as toxic waste because it was being recycled. So the next step in the story is going to be how DEQ treats Gordon on this issue, and even more importantly, what is going to happen to thousands of barrels of toxic waste, which there really is no perfect environmental solution for those barrels. And that just goes to show that we have to look at the process that produced those barrels and develop clean production instead of production that is based on using toxic chemicals and generating toxic waste. So we're gonna probably see thousands of barrels coming back to this area, and it'll be interesting to see what becomes of those. We have contacted U.S. Customs and alerted them to this, but we don't know what they're going to do yet. Because the company has recalled the shipment, they don't need to take action on that aspect. But I'm sure they'll at least be monitoring this recent shipment as it comes back.
The other thing that I wanted to say was, you asked a question about the people who toured the Dole facility. There was a delegation of ANC members, ArcLife Africa, which is the environmental organization that we've been working with on the Dole facility since 1990. There was already a scheduled tour of the Dole facility in Cato Ridge. And as soon as they got out, that's when they called us. So this has been a facility that they had already planned an inspection, and they were there, and they got out and called us about 30 minutes after they got out there. So it's an ANC delegation with ArcLife Africa members and Africa, who we've been working with on those since 1990. No, it's a national environmental group in South Africa. Yeah, it was a delegation of various groups of people. There are others. Unfortunately, I can't tell for sure.
It was an international delegation, but the visit was sponsored or arranged by the ANC. Thor, South Africa is owned by, so it's based in in UK, in England. It's, I
Okay,
don't know
because
the
you-
name of the top executive, but the parent company is Thor Chemicals United Kingdom. And one thing I should have mentioned is that Thor did commit today to stop all importation, so there will be no more shipments to South Africa from this border to the ANC delegation. Keep in mind that the ANC is the soon-to-be very near future government of South Africa, so that is a substantial thing.
the golf facility in the UK was closed down because they had similar problems. There was a January 31st report that was done, and they were investigating a lot of the things that have been happening. It was Go UK owns Go South Africa. There was an investigation that was done on Go UK and Go South Africa, following all kinds of reports. And the Go UK facility was closed because of the problems. And as one person on that report says, if it's bad enough for the UK, it should be bad enough for South Africa. They were facing charges of a close down and all kinds of other fines. And so they closed the facility and paid to continue doing that in South Africa. So they know it's bad.
Any more questions for anybody? Okay,
Thank you very much for coming.
Of these chemicals. That's insanity. And what do we know about these chemicals? The ancient Egyptians were aware of toxic effects of lead. Sir Percival Potts in 1776 made the first link between occupational exposure and a disease when he noted a high incidence of scrotal cancer amongst chimney sweeps. The disease was probably the result of exposure to a polyaromatic hydrocarbon, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon called benzoapyrene. And you saw Mr. Fontenot showing the slides of the 4 coke ovens, which are very close to me. And one of the ingredients that's coming out of those coke ovens, in addition to the particulate matter, is benzoapyrene. Rachel Carson taught us about the devastating effects of pesticides, and our own Louisiana state bird, the brown pelican, became extinct here in Louisiana as a result of bioaccumulation of the pesticides, which interfered with calcium metabolism. And beginning in 1938, the strong link between cigarette smoke and cancer began to be established. There are numerous studies linking specific chemicals to specific organ dysfunction and disease. For example, if we look at the top 20 chemicals released in East Baton Rouge Parish in 1990, we see that better than, I forgot what the percent is now, the majority of them have some clearly known health effect. At the top of the list is methanol, which is a neurotoxin, styrene, which is a mucous membrane irritant, a mutagen, and a neurotoxin, ethylene, a neurotoxin, ammonia, an irritant and a neurotoxin, hydrochloric acid, an irritant. Come on down the line. Methyl ethyl ketone. It's a developmental toxin as well as being an irritant and a neurotoxin. And more reproductive toxins, respiratory toxins, etc. More than 84 million pounds of these various chemicals were discharged or released, discharged or transferred in East Baton Rouge Parish in 1991. A large amount of that was coming in 2 commercial hazardous waste facilities. Rollins, which is about a half-mile from my house, that is their incinerator is, and Rhone-Palit. And I think it is significant to note that the largest black land-grant college in the nation lies between these 2 commercial hazardous waste facilities. We know enough to be much wiser and far more careful and responsible, but the generators of the chemicals and the government that regulates them choose instead to make excuses and place the burden of proof on the citizen who is sick and to blame the victims of the poisoning. They say we are hysterical housewives. They say we are overly emotional and illogical. I'll admit to being emotional. It's a little difficult not to be emotional when you see your own health going down the drain. It's a bit difficult not to be emotional when you see your neighbors dropping one by one. They say it's our fault because we smoke too much, drink too much, and eat too much hog fat. They say the studies were on animals and cannot be extrapolated to humans. What they want is dead bodies. Well, let's take a look at some. I brought transparencies. We don't have a transparency machine. Excuse me. But I have a map that shows the Alson community. And in a distance of 4.5 miles, we have 2 Superfund pits, a lot of other pits that probably should be Superfund pits, a lead smelter that takes in commercial hazardous waste, 4 coke ovens, the Union tank car that used to wash out the bottoms of tanks and dump them guess where? Into the bayou that fed off into the swamp. A railroad switching and storage yard. Tank cars there that really aren't supposed to have chemicals in them, do have chemicals in them. And this is very, very close to me, right at the back edge of my property. And you don't know if one of those cars springs a leak at night with the right stuff in it. I'll never see morning. That's how close it is to me. And numerous chemical manufacturing companies. Our community is impacted by about 17 million pounds of toxic chemicals annually. That's the reported chemicals, which represents about 5% of the actual number. We represent 0.53% of East Baton Rouge Parish's population, yet we take in about 25% of the total toxics and about 45% of the air toxics. That's right there in Allison. If you look at one of the streets in Allison, it's got 9 families on it. There's only one family, only one house on that street that maybe does not have illnesses. And I have to say maybe because the people in that house have never stayed there any time. It's been a constant turnover. Nobody ever stays there very long. All of the other houses have a wide variety of problems, such things as chronic coughs, breathing difficulties, rashes, sinus problems, headaches, dizziness, nosebleeds, and cancers. Of the 9 houses within the last 6 years, 4 of those, let me see if I got it right, 4 of those houses have experienced cancers amongst adults. There have been 2 cancer deaths. There are multiple cancers in some of those houses. Some of the people have had multiple cancers. And I don't mean a metastasized cancer, but they had one cancer and then came down with another cancer. There's a family that lives very close to the Superfund. I did a pedigree study on that family. And the problems that go from generation to generation are interesting. The original parents developed breathing problems after the Superfund site was opened. One of the parents had high blood pressure and died, I think, of a stroke. The other parent developed cancer. Now let's take this high blood pressure, because it crops up in several different generations. Now, we all know the first thing that you're going to think. Well, high blood pressure is familial. There is a pattern of inheritance of high blood pressure. That's one thing. High blood pressure is environmental. Has a lot to do with what you eat, your behavior, your lifestyle. Especially if you smoke. We recognize the cardiovascular link to cigarette smoking. How interesting. You see, this individual, the first one, didn't have high blood pressure, or at least it was not recognized until after the Superfund site had been there for a while. Again, that doesn't tell us too much, because we know people can walk around for a long time with high blood pressure and be unaware of it. But it is interesting that many of the chemicals that are present in cigarette smoke are some of the same chemicals that are coming out of our smokestacks and that are at the Superfund site. Is it not possible that some of the chemicals that these people are exposing to are inducing cardiovascular disease in them? I mentioned a granddaughter here who suffered severe high blood pressure and was very heavily medicated. She left home. She's no longer on blood pressure medication at all. We see a lot of cardiovascular diseases in people in Superfund and other kinds of toxic communities. One of the greatest fighters in this struggle was Patsy Oliver, who lived at Carver Terrace. Patsy Oliver died suddenly and unexpectedly of a heart attack in December. A month before she died, her daughter had died of a stroke. They lived on top of what had been a creosote factory for 20, 30 years before EPA finally begrudgingly gave them funds so they could move away to a cleaner environment. I think that this is one area that perhaps we need to look at. Is there a link between cardiovascular disease and toxic exposure? Many of the people in this family suffer from rashes. Frequently, they'll have an odor in the day. That night, they go to bed with sore throats and fevers. Little boy in the family, eyes swell up, ears swell shut. Very common. Some common health complaints that we find around the country in communities, poison and toxic chemicals, are chronic fatigue. Everybody's always tired. Even little children are tired, don't want to go out and play. They just want to lay around because they're tired. Sinus problems. I see a lot of this with my students as Southern. Youngsters who don't live in Baton Rouge, youngsters who have moved here from other places, and who suddenly have serious sinus problems. We have sinus problems all the time in Alson. And people in other communities like Alson constantly are suffering sinus problems. Severe headaches. Even little children with severe headaches. Children who don't go to school because their heads hurt. Children who are not in school are not learning. Children who don't learn in school usually don't stay in, they drop out. And children who drop out of school cannot be productive citizens in this society. They need that education. What happens to them? You end up paying for them on welfare, or you end up paying for them in jail, when they in fact could be productive members of this society if maybe they had a better chance. Asthma and breathing difficulties, very common problems. Chronic coughs, just plain old chronic coughs all the time. Dizziness, flu-like symptoms, nosebleeds. In my community, in a 12-month period, 3 adults suffered severe nosebleeds, spontaneous nosebleeds. So severe, in fact, they had to be carried to the emergency rooms, and it took some effort on the part of doctors to stop the bleeding. Each one was going to a different doctor. Each one was told they had a severe sinus infection. In that same 12-month period, a lot of people in the community began displaying nosebleeds of a lesser degree. The cancer, I've mentioned the cancer on one street. This is one of the first things that people started talking about. Everybody they knew in every house, all of a sudden, they're cancers. Incidentally, I mentioned the 6 cancers on this one street. Well, it's just about that 20-year time period, that 20-year lag period, that cancer starts showing up. And then joint pains, arthritis-like pains, even in small children. Now we see diseases, some more severe kinds of diseases that are found in communities like this across the country. Cancer, of course, always there. Lupus, large numbers of lupus. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Up in El Dorado, Arkansas, I got a call from a lady up there, distressed, frustrated, angry, because nobody's working with her, nobody's helping her. They've got the incinerator that receives the radioactive material that Rollins also received from the same shipments. They don't have a landfill, so when they got through burning it, they shipped it to us, and Rollins buried it. But in a small community of less than 25,000 people, she had a significant number of people with Lou Gehrig's disease and a large number of people with lupus. Seizures amongst children. And also with children, again, is the perception of people in the community of hyperkinetic children, children with other behavioral disorders, and children with learning disorders. Cardiovascular disease, chronic bronchitis, kidney and liver failure. In Tucson, Arizona, the south side of Tucson, there's a plume of TCE that contaminated the drinking water of these people more than 40 years. And the government knew about it. These people did not. They knew the water started tasting funny, smelling funny, and they kept drinking it. They've got a high rate of cancer on one street. 28 out of 30 houses, people have cancer. And they've got a high rate of people undergoing kidney dialysis. An interesting one has kind of cropped up. granulomatous angiitis. It's I think a mast cell tumor, a cell of the immune system. It's a response to a persistent antigen. It's frequently found in people who are suffering from either syphilis or tuberculosis. The person who suffered this condition had no infectious agents, no bacteria, no fungi, no detectable viruses. I mention this one also because citizens in other toxic communities have also been recognized as having tumors in the blood vessels. Is there a connection? I certainly think this is an area that needs to be studied. And then, of course, miscarriages and birth defects. Now, it's very interesting that of the 25 substances emitted into the air, this is U.S.-wide, in 1987, 19 of them are documented neurotoxins. We have no choice but to breathe the air around us. Now, to me, this raises some questions. ATSDR, for 7 years now, has been going around the country doing health assessments. Others have been doing health assessments or health studies. And in the majority of cases, the answer always comes back the same. There's nothing statistically significant here. And as a consequence, those citizens in those communities have to continue suffering those conditions, and nothing else is done. Those of you who've seen me speak before, who've talked with me before, know I have a real bent against risk assessment and epidemiology based on my negative experiences with it. It just seems to me, though, that if citizens are out there saying we're sick all over the country, and we're not talking about people who get on the phone and talk to each other because they're too poor to do that, don't even know each other exist. But they're saying the same things all over the country. They have the same symptoms all over the country. They're sick. And yet, scientists can't seem to find this out. It would seem to me as though the tool that is being used is an inadequate tool. And that we need to take some of this brilliance that we have and some of this wonderful education that we have and look and see if we can't find a better tool that's going to really reveal what's there. Or maybe our whole approach is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be sitting with numbers on a page based on occupational exposures and so forth and making predictions about what the risks are. Maybe we need to really get out there and find out what has actually happened. What we need are clinical studies in these communities. If people say they're sick, hey, make them put up or shut up, because I'm really tired of it. If we're sick, let's find it out. If we're not sick, let's find that out and say, hey, shut up, you are hysterical. But the only way you're going to do that is if you get out there in those communities and you do actual clinical studies. I think also that it's both immoral and unethical to keep going to communities and studying people without giving them anything in return. You go out there and you look for the biomarkers and say, oh yeah, they've been exposed, so what? So what are you going to do about these people who've been exposed? Are you going to continue monitoring them to see if something's going to develop from that exposure so that at the first time that something shows up, you can begin to treat them so that they have a better outcome? I also question so much emphasis being placed on cancer. Most cancers require a very long lag period, around 20 years. A lot of things can happen in 20 years. Populations in America have a tendency to be very mobile. So the population that was exposed 20 years ago and should be showing the cancer now may move to somewhere else. You may have a whole bunch of new people there. There are other symptoms, illnesses, problems that crop up much sooner. And maybe we ought to start looking for some certain sentinel illnesses and looking at them more so than after people complain and say, hey, we're dying of cancer, and then you do a study and say, there's no cancer here. Your cancer rate is the same or less than everybody else's. And then finally, when citizens, after years and years of neglect, out of frustration and anger, they decide to do something for themselves, and then they conduct surveys. And they're always told, but that's unscientific. It may be unscientific, but it's more than anything you've got, because you've got nothing. So I think it's very, very important for us to work together, for you, the health professionals, to start looking at your tools and saying, hey, maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe we do need a new tool. Maybe we do need a new approach, because the citizens of this country need you. And the citizens of this country are increasingly growing disenchanted with government. Thank you very much.
Yes. Are there any questions? Yes. Can you identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Irma Lawson, and I'm a health researcher from the University of Kentucky. I know that the rate of diabetes among Afro-Americans is very, very high. And I'm wondering in Allison County, parish, counties are in Kentucky, if there is a larger percentage of people who are complaining of diabetic symptoms.
We've been dying so fast of cancer and other things, we haven't really had a chance to assess diabetes. We're still in the process, actually, of trying to make a complete assessment of the health problems in the community. So I really could not give you that answer for this particular situation, for this particular disease. Yes.
Lawrence, I wanted to mention to you that I was fortunate enough to be at a contaminated sediment seminar last week, at which an ATSDR professor was there, and their findings from the Great Lakes study area will be published this spring, or the preliminary findings, and she shared some of them with us, which do show a correlation between those who had sustenance fishing, for instance, and ate Great Lakes fish, and they did studies that were geared to that. She called it cohort. I'm not familiar with the scientific language, but those studies have determined relationships between eating contaminated fish and birth weight in low birth weight in babies and learning rates in children of those mothers who had eaten these fish for a minimum of 6 years prior to giving birth. So they are doing some studies, and there will be some findings from that area of the country. I do not know about our area of the country.
Well, consider that the Superfund site has been in our community since '64 and was recognized as a health threat in '65, and we still don't have a health assessment. And I have no idea what's going to actually be in that health assessment. But we certainly, our community also, for many years, did subsistence hunting and fishing and gardening. It's very important in that community.
One of the points that you made was that you do a study and people come back and say it's not the rates aren't any higher. Well, compared to what? Compared to the already high rates. You might, if it's lower, find that your area might be safer for one thing from another, but if you see nationwide trends and you find out you have a high rate, it doesn't surprise you that it's the same as somebody else's high rate. And that's not the way to ask the question, whether it's statistically significant or not. What's important is we don't have historical data, so you have to start with something. You say, well, the rate is this high here, and that's not acceptable to us. Whether or not it's as high other places, that's interesting, but not what we're looking for. I think I'm being told we have to break for it. Okay, there's a phone call for John Anderson. Okay. Well, it now is time, though, to take a break. And where will we be meeting?
The luncheon is on the main, is downstairs. Leslie?
We're downstairs.
excuse me. I'm Phyllis Greenberger, the Executive Director of the Society for the Advancement of Women's Health Research, and I'm delighted to be here and welcome you all today. We have a luncheon speaker that's on a very tight schedule, and so I will be introducing him now, and you can continue with your salads and eat quietly, and then we'll continue with lunch after he's through. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Congressman Cleo Fields. Congressman Fields represents Louisiana's 4th Congressional District, one of the largest congressional districts in the country, covering parts of 28 parishes, including Shreveport, Monroe, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. He was born in Baton Rouge as a graduate of McKinley High School in Baton Rouge and earned his BA from Southern University in Baton Rouge. He was elected to Congress in 1992 at the age of 30, and he is currently the youngest member of the 103rd Congress. Congressman Fields serves on the House Committee on Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs, and on the House Committee on Small Business. And we're delighted that he could take time out of his schedule to come this afternoon to speak to us. Congressman Fields. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. I got a little nervous when she said I represent the one of the largest congressional districts in the country, covering over 28 parishes, because Peter Jennings with ABC News sent the crew in here today, and they've been following me all around, and I've been trying to talk about how compact the district is. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. And let me thank each of you for being here today. It is a pleasure to talk to women about women research in the medical profession. But first I want to talk a little bit about healthcare. I want to talk about healthcare from a global perspective, and then talk a little bit more directly to the issues that affect women. And then take any questions that you may have, because I'm really here to be more of a person who want to know what you have to say versus what I have to tell you. But the healthcare crisis in America is a very serious crisis that we are addressing and we must address. We have over 37 million people in this country that do not have health insurance. In a period of a year, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 57 million people that don't have health insurance at some point during the year. Now, many people think when you say health insurance and those individuals who don't have it are individuals who are unemployed. When in truth, in fact, many people who are working hard every day, and at the end of the day, they're still too poor to have health insurance because of the astronomical cost of health insurance in this country. So in Congress, we're working very hard to devise a package or a bill that will address the access problem that we have in this country. Now, one of the problems we also have with the healthcare system, and that is not only access, but affordability. Affordability is a serious problem because there are many people, as a matter of fact, 90% of Americans who live every day, who have good jobs, who have savings accounts, are living one paycheck from disaster, from bankruptcy. I was talking to the editor of the the Lafayette Advertiser in Lafayette, Louisiana, who discovered that even he was a paycheck or disaster away from being almost bankrupt. Because anytime one have a serious illness and must be hospitalized for any long period of time or any short period of time, the cost that's involved is unbelievable and incredible. And we're going to have to do something in this country to control costs. I am committing myself, and I've committed myself in Congress, to vote for a plan that have universal access, that gives access to any and everybody to be able to have health insurance. And secondly, one that provides for strong measures for cost containment. Because we can no longer continue to have the healthcare costs rising and rising in this country, higher than the gross national product. So those are some serious issues that we'll be addressing in this 103rd Congress. Now the big question is, when will we finish this big puzzle called health insurance? Your guess is almost as good as mine. I think the debate will start in March. In Louisiana, we're going to have a host of town hall meetings. We have Donna Shalala, who will be in Louisiana to talk about health care, and Jocelyn Elders, who will be talking about health care. And we're going to have a slew of town hall meetings to talk about this issue so that we can get some real understanding from the voting public as to what direction we should take when we deal with health insurance and help reform in this country. And then after that, somewhere in the neighborhood of April, May, and June, is going to be the core of the debate in the healthcare arena. As you all know, there are about 3 proposals that are pending before Congress: the McDermott's plan, the Cooper-Breaux plan, the President's plan, and then there's another plan on the Senate side as well. So actually 4 plans or proposals that are in Congress today that will be debated. I do not know what the final analysis will be, but I can say to you, as one member of Congress, I will not vote for a plan that does not include universal access and do not have cost containment. Now, in terms of women research concerns in the field of health care, I do not think we can afford to leave the issue of women research and how health care affect women in particular, and people in general, out of the health care debate. Because there's some issues that affect women in a different way than it affects men, than it affects anybody else in the country. For example, breast cancer. Of course, men don't have to worry about breast cancer, but women do. And those are the kind of things we need adequate, firm research for in our country. I'm going to be committed to working with women groups and all groups who are concerned about and conscious, have a conscience to include women research in the health care proposal. I think it's important because I have a wife and I have a mother, and I know some of the particular problems that women have in the area of health care. And I'm very cognizant of it and very concerned about it, and want to do any and everything I can do to help from a research perspective, because I think it's the right thing to do and the right way to go. Well, lastly, there are some other questions about whether or not we will even end the health care debate in the 103rd Congress. I think we will. I have a strong conviction that a health care plan will pass this session of Congress. I think the President is so committed to passing a health care bill until he may bypass the recess altogether and push Congress to pass a health care bill that brings about universal access and affordability to all Americans, and also deals with strong cost containment. And I think that will come before 1995. I'm certainly going to be committed to that. It's going to take the efforts of people in this room, if you're really concerned, as you are, about women issues and about health care and how we reform our health care system. It's going to take you working with your national organizations and your local organizations and getting involved. It is not going to be easy. I mean, any health care proposal that we pass or even debate on in Congress is going to be a very tough issue to deal with. And it's going to take groups like this group to send that message to Washington, D.C., that we need research in the area of women's concerns, inclusive and all-inclusive of the health care proposal. If that does not happen, I can assure you that it will not be included. So my challenge to you today is to do all you can do to lobby your members of Congress and to lobby the entire Congress as a whole to make sure that women issues are not left at the gate in this whole debate that we call health care reform. With that in mind, I'm going to stop. And I see we're fun, though. It's good to see you. I'm going to stop and take any questions that one may have at this time. Any questions? Whenever you don't have questions, that means you've covered the subject quite... Yes, sir. Preventive medicines will be considered in the health care, in the President's proposal, as well as McDermott's proposal. I have not studied the Cooper-Breaux proposal in detail, but that is an issue that's talked about in Congress and an issue that will be a part and all-inclusive of the health care debate. Ms. Roberts? groups of support. I mean, millions of Americans live within close proximities to Superfund sites in this country. I'm very cognizant of that fact because I like to consider myself a pro-environmentalist, and I have a Superfund site in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that's located in the 4th Congressional District. I'd be more than happy to work with you, Ms. Robinson, in supporting and pushing legislation in Congress to address this very issue. And on that, not on that same note, but just to take the healthcare debate just a little bit further, there's another thing that I think we need to be very cognizant of as it relates to insurance. I think in the debate of healthcare reform, we must also deal with the issue of pre-existing condition. I mean, why do people have insurance? What is the purpose of having insurance? I mean, to take care of illnesses. Everybody hope to have and wish to have and pray to have the best health possible. But the reason why you have health insurance is for that day and for that calamity that may occur. I mean, it's almost like heaven. I mean, you know, people, nobody want to die, but everybody want to go to heaven. So everybody pray and they try to save their souls while they're living. So the same thing goes with healthcare. And we got too many too many insurance companies that do not insure people who have a pre-existing condition. I'm going to be fighting profusely in Congress to change that, because those are the very people that need health insurance. As a 24-year-old or 23-year-old, I was able to get one of the best policies possible probably on the market, because they brought two nurses, walked into my office from this insurance company. They gave me all kinds of tests, and I did well. But the older I get, probably the worse I do on these tests. So I was fortunate to get one on the front side. But I would hate to know that if this policy is ever canceled for whatever reason, that I could not get the same kind of quality of service and health care that I have today because of some illness that I may receive in the future or get in the future. And we got to also talk about the environmental considerations that we must take into effect in terms of why people have some of the problems they have, why women in particular have some of the problems they have. Problems they have with breast cancer. Is there association with the environment and breast cancer? Is there an association with infant mortality, with environment? I mean, those kind of issues must come to the forefront, even in the healthcare debate, because those are issues that have not been talked about per se in the halls of Congress in the manner that they should and will be talked about probably within this healthcare debate. But that's going to be contingent upon groups like this group and environmental groups across the country. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you anticipate that the Mississippi River will be designated under the reauthorization of the Clean Water Act as a special management area similar to the Gulf of Mexico? Is that a real possibility?
I think it is. I'm going to be working profusely with Senator Johnston to see that happens. I mean, the Delta area of our country is the poorest, I mean, in all aspects, or in many aspects. And that designation, in my opinion, is a step in the right direction, and I'm going to be fighting to see that it is designated. Not only in that respect, but as an empowerment zone to develop that region of the country economically as well. Because I do think that economics also play a role with healthcare. And all these issues, to some degree, are intertwined. Questions? Yes, sir. I'm jumped on by my friends and colleagues in the profession of law, but let's be very clear on we cannot have strong health care reform in this country and not have tort reform, and that's the only way we can do it. Everybody in this debate will have to give something. I mean, insurance companies are going to have to come to the table and give. Doctors and hospitals are going to have to come to the table and give, and lawyers are going to have to come to the table and give as well. Because if we have a system where we bring about universal access and cost containment, we're going to have to deal with the liability issue as it relates to doctors. Now, I do not think that doctors ought to be taken off the hook when it comes to liability. I mean, that diminishes your quality of care. But I do think there needs to be some tort reform, and there's a balanced approach that must be given to that issue. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I have absolutely no problems with supporting anything that would bring about, and we're having a big debate now with chlorine, as a matter of fact, with the plants versus environmental groups, and Mike Espion yesterday, as a matter of fact, passed on the 22nd of this month, passed a rule that deals with certain meats and the dairy products or whatever. I think this Congress and this president is moving with all deliberate speeds to make sure that if you can show an association of harm, danger to the health, safety of people and individuals, be it in water, be it in food, be it in the environment, we need to eradicate that. I'm committed to that on all fronts. I mean, even in the area of I have a lot of industry in my district, chemical plants, for example. They are big job producers in the district which I represent. I'm the last district, my district is the last district that need to lose one job. I cannot afford to lose a McDonald's job, let alone losing a job at a plant. But truth in fact, we cannot compromise health and safety for employment, for jobs. Why? Because a sick man cannot work well and a dead man can't work at all. And those two things, whenever they crash, they cannot be compromised, in my opinion. And I'm going to be working hard to make sure that they're not. Any other questions? See, whenever you say any other questions, that means that, okay, this guy's ready to go. I want to thank you all very much. I could not find a better place to be than to be at this conference, because it's an issue that's going to be talked about a lot in the halls of Congress in a manner that's never been talked about in the past. But that's going to be contingent upon this group continuing to be an active participant in the legislative process. And I want to close on this note. You know, a lot of people say, well, government does not work. Let me tell you, government does work. Government works if you work government. To give you a prime example, this week in Congress in Washington, D.C., there were families and individuals all across the nation that jammed up the entire phone circuit in Washington, D.C., and not only in Washington, but back home in our local offices, dealing with H.R. 6, a bill that we just voted on a day ago. And that bill dealt with the funding of Title I and public schools. And it had some restriction on an amendment to deal with home schools and private schools. And as a result of that, those influx of calls, or that influx of calling, that amendment failed, almost, passed rather, almost 300 and something to nothing. Your voice counts, your vote works, and it can work if you exercise that right. So on the issue of health care, please jam those phones in Washington, D.C. On the issue of women's research in the medical profession, jam those phones in Washington, D.C., and let the members of Congress know that it's an issue that you're concerned about and an issue that you will advocate now, henceforth, and forevermore. Thank you very much, and have a good conference.
water that we all count on as being absolutely healthy contains a health risk.
It has to do with the way the water is processed. Byproducts of treatment are blamed for as many as 10,000 cases of cancer nationwide.
Last night we told you about several studies that have found a health risk associated with chlorinated municipal drinking water.
It shouldn't have happened in Milwaukee, but it did. Thousands of people got sick from water contaminated by a parasite, even though their system met all the regulatory requirements. We will hear from Eric Olson, Senior Attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council.
We've had laws on the books for many years now, yet we still cannot feel comfortable with what's coming out of our tap. We really have to crack down on this problem.
The sad fact is that the programs of the Safe Drinking Water Act are in many respects in horrible disarray. A GAO report prepared last spring for our Health and Environment Subcommittee found that most states are ill-equipped to detect and prevent serious drinking water contamination problems, such as the one in Milwaukee.
Our drinking water can contain disease-causing microorganisms and toxins such as lead, copper, and chloroform. These contaminants are of such concern that EPA's Science Advisory Board has recommended treating drinking water pollutants as one of only 4 high-risk human health problems warranting priority attention.
We do need to think about priorities in this country. There's a lot of debate right now about health care costs. I think a lot of health care costs could be avoided if we would have safer drinking water.
Unsafe drinking water is probably responsible for more deaths, infant deaths from the disease, than any other environmental factor in the world. That's not a big issue in the United States because of the advancements we've made in water treatment technology. But we live in a world which contains, unfortunately, a chemical soup. And there are trace amounts, very small amounts of these chemicals in pretty much everything in our environment, including drinking water, including our groundwater reserves, and also including surface water. So these kinds of things do find their way into drinking water supplies. In addition to that, microbes, bacteria, and viral contaminants also find their way into our drinking water supplies. We have to be more sensible about how we protect our groundwater supplies and our rivers so that we can maintain
a high quality of pure drinking water and prevent the kinds of adverse effects that we know can be related to contaminated water.
To empower themselves, to learn about their water and do something about the quality of water. The National Consumers League held a forum here in Washington, a national forum on safe and quality drinking water. And at that forum, we introduced a checklist for consumers that they can use to check on their own quality of water in their community. Call your local water authority. Ask them to test your water. If testing is not an option in your community, contact a certified laboratory to test that water. Learn how much lead and other metals and chemicals are in your water. Find out from your water authority or the Environmental Protection Agency what is safe. If your water is not safe, inform health officials and water authorities, your landlord, and your city council about the problem. Purify your water at home or purchase a quality water product.
Okay, are there any questions you have? That might
or what was on the tape? Yes.
I wondered, what about this chlorine that they're putting in the water to get the germs out, and yet it forms carcinogens? We don't even know that. Has anyone approached another method to study this?
Yes, there are other methods. Chlorine is used mainly in the majority of systems in the United States to disinfect the water. I know that there are a lot of organizations that have been pushing for what's called getting rid of chlorine in the water, but chlorine is used in a lot of things besides water. The amount that is used in our water systems now should pose no risk. However, I know that the Environmental Protection Agency had what's known as a reg-neg process to look at regulation negotiation with several different organizations to determine the amount of chlorine that is safe for our water supplies. You had a question, do you have a comment on that?
The chlorination process that we're talking about, there is many other processes being developed at this point in time, much more so with wastewater treatment than with water treatment because of the dissolved organic content in the wastewater effluents is much higher than it is in the regular effluents. And in fact, will be chairman of the WF Disinfection Committee for the next 3 years. And one thing we are seeing is in the wastewater business is an advent to the use of UV as disinfection over the organic material, the chlorinated type, because of the high organics in wastewater effluents. But the water supplies, we have a problem in the collection system. You have to have a disinfectant going through the collection system itself to ensure safety from the water treatment plant to the tap. And so that we cannot completely leave chemicals out of a system because we have to have some insurance of safety of the water between the time it leaves the waste treatment plant to the time it gets to your tap. And so that's where chemical processing has to be used much more so probably in a water treatment plant than it would be in a wastewater plant.
Thank you. Yes?
We in New Orleans, we use chloramines. And in fact, the research was done at UNO to point out how bad these chlorines were. And at least 10 years ago,
They switched from chlorinated with gas, and that reduced these number of carcinogens in the
we were
water
told
supply.
that they were
But that's
reduced by 95%, something like that, by using chloramine.
To disinfect the water.
Yeah, but the question is, what, I'm surprised that more people don't use the chloramines instead of the chlorines. I know there's a trade-off.
Well, there's several different ways, and you had mentioned UV ultraviolet as, yes.
The chloramines are not used in disinfection. The chloramines are used as a disinfectant in the water supply system. Okay? So they're going to be using like chlorination and dechlorination. And I'm not certain, Leonard, you would know more about that.
We're using chloramines.
But you using them totally for disinfectant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we should, when you speak, maybe you can address there are about 3 or 4 different ways to disinfect the water. And with each type of disinfectant, there's always a byproduct that then the water authority has to deal with to make sure that product doesn't also contaminate the water. If there was a question, I think.
It's not a question. She asked, I think, about how are there any other ways of disinfecting other than using chlorine. And I know there are places that use ozone.
Yes.
And chlorine, fluoride. So that's
The ozone method is one that I know that Milwaukee is looking at, and to completely change over, for instance, a major metropolitan area from one to another can be very expensive, but I know that Milwaukee is looking at that.
In Europe, ozone is used much more than chlorination. And it's primarily, I think, was done as a taste back in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. They had much more contaminated water in Europe than we did here. And so the chlorination process, the people wouldn't drink it. And so they went to ozonation. And so in Europe, you find many, many more ozonation plants than you do in the United States.
And the carbon filtration system, what about that?
For a major metropolitan area to use.
I know we considered it here, but it was so expensive, and it could.
As I said, with each, I should have brought, there's a wonderful chart that shows all the different kinds of disinfecting water, and that there are byproducts or
negatives and positives for each one of these different ways to disinfect water. I didn't bring it with me.
I have a question about the money that's going to be put into the municipal water systems for safety purposes. What about the rural areas where people still use well water? Is this being addressed at all with the safe drinking water, where you have to pay to get your own water tested? And I just wanted to know.
I don't know if it's addressed in the Safe Drinking Water Act or not.
This would also be in many poor areas.
Absolutely, yes. Yes?
I think if you have well water in Louisiana, I think you have to get your own well water tested as a private well.
That's true, I think, in several, all rural areas, that if you do use your own well, that you do have to have it tested.
But it should still meet the standard.
Yes?
I have a question. I was using bottled water. Now I boil my water in a large amber pot. And I noticed when I let it set on the stove for a while, there's a ring that forms at the top of the pot. I'm wondering, what is that?
To tell you the truth, I really don't know. Is there anyone in this room that could help me on that?
Okay, that's calcium carbonate, which is it's a lime deposit, and it's just well, I'm going to get to it in my talk, but basically it's good to have it in your water. As far as things like lead, it's good to have a high hardness of water. That's the hardness of your water there, and that's why we tested well for the lead testing, because we have a lot of that stuff in our water. But then when you boil it, you get a lot of that stuff. Huh?
You're thinking I shouldn't boil it?
Well, it's not necessary to boil it. I mean, if you're worried about something, I mean, why do you
It probably, if you, you might want to have your water tested to find out if you really do have to boil it, but.
Is it New Orleans water?
No, Jefferson.
Oh, Jefferson. Okay, well, I'm
Jefferson, you boil it.
Actually, distilling your water and having distilled water is really not good for you either. You need the electrolytes in the water. You need your calcium, your magnesium, and stuff like that in there. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, so that boiling the water, if the water is being properly treated, which most likely would be, then would be not as good as leaving it as is.
It sounds like a lot of the questions you have will be answered by some of the people who will be speaking on panels, specifically about some areas here in Louisiana. So I think I will go on to, David, do you want to introduce our next panel?
Does everyone have a question?
Well, I want to know, David was, when she said boiling, you have this ring around, does that, the container she's boiling the water in, does that have any part to play in the boiling of water?
It could, yes.
It's an amber pot. It's a glass pot.
Oh, glass pot.
Yes.
That should be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Linda. The first panel this morning is titled Drinking Water Quality Crisis or Controlled. This is a smattering in my, what I call a shotgun approach to getting an overview of what's going on with the whole water issue. We have a public affairs specialist, Darlene Shook from FDA, who will speak about the new bottled water regs and seafood sanitation proposed regulations and what their jurisdiction over drinking water is. And then we have Dr. Robert Reimers and Dr. William Hartley from the, Dr. Reimers is an environmental engineer and Dr. Hartley is an environmental toxicologist from the Tulane School of Public Health, Environmental Health Sciences Department. And Leonard Hirsch, who's a water chemist with the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board. What we'd like to do is have each person
take about 15 minutes. This is a larger panel than the rest of them, but about 15 minutes to focus in on their understanding and their responsibility over the whole drinking water quality issue. And we'll do it in the agenda format, starting off with Ms. Shook from FDA, and then Dr. Reimers, Dr. Hartley, and then Leonard Hirsch. So, Darlene.
Well, good morning. I'd like to thank, first of all, David for inviting me here today. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to work with your national organization. The FDA invited the National Consumers League, along with a number of other consumer organizations, into our headquarters to discuss some of our seafood regulations and consumer concerns about molluscan shellfish. So I feel very privileged and honored to be here with you today, because those folks that I worked with in Washington at your national level really provided FDA with a lot of not only practical comments, but really well thought out comments as well, and they really helped us formulate some of our regulations and proposals that I'll be talking about today. The first thing I want to talk about is the bottled water. I'm watching my time here. I don't want to overrun.
We actually are ahead of schedule. So.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Water is probably the largest component of our diet. It's one of the essential nutrients and is a really essential part of our lives. I think humans have always had a real fascination with water. I know many of us, when I go out and watch the Mississippi River and watch the boats go up and down, it's really fascinating to watch the movement of water. So I think humans have always had a real fascination with it. And that's reflected in our art that we see and in the number of fountains that you see in a lot of cities. Water has been really tied into a lot of religious ceremonies and worships. And if any of you have ever been to France, I haven't, but this is what they tell me, that you can walk along and watch people in the cafes sipping their Perrier water, and here in the United States this has become more and more popular too, with a little twist of lemon in it. So drinking water has actually become very stylish. And in fact, in France, they actually have contests or judgings where they will actually judge different types of drinking water. And they do this as seriously as they do with their finest wines. So water is really an essential part of our whole society. Just to give you an idea of how popular bottled water has become, in 1984, roughly there were 4 gallons per person consumed of bottled water. In 1991, that 4 gallons more than doubled. There are approximately 700 different brands of bottled water on the market. There are about 430 different bottling facilities in the United States alone. This is about a $2 billion industry, and it's growing rapidly every year. And about 10% of the bottled water in this country is imported. The way that the FDA regulates bottled water is, first of all, we operate, one of our main pieces of legislation is called the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FD&C. And under the FD&C, water is actually defined as a food, because under that act, food is defined as any article of food or drinking material that is consumed by humans or other animals. Kind of includes a lot of things there. So water becomes considered as a food. And in 1974, which is when the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed, that gave the EPA primary responsibility over the municipal tap water supply. And FDA then became responsible for bottled water and water which is used in the processing or the manufacture of foods. So our responsibilities between FDA and EPA became more clearly defined. That Safe Drinking Water Act also gave EPA the primary responsibility for setting quality control standards. And what that meant was that EPA then set tolerance levels for things like bacterial contamination, chemical contamination, pesticides. And when the EPA set these standards, the FDA must also legally adopt those same standards or else publish in the Federal Register a reason why we have not adopted the EPA standards. So it's very stringent there as to what the authority is with drinking water. In 1975, then FDA became responsible for not only the quality of bottled water, but also what we call GMPs, good manufacturing practices. And what this basically means is that manufacturers must operate under safe conditions. They must produce products that are manufactured under sanitary conditions so that it's safe for the consumer. In 1979, there was a memorandum of understanding that came out between the EPA and the FDA. And again, what this simply stated was that FDA now legally had control over any water that was used in the processing of food. So once water enters a processing plant, a food processing or manufacturing plant, now FDA had responsibility for that water. It had legal authority over that water source, and also gave us full control over bottled water. Some of the ways that we can enforce our regulations are, first of all, again, is the FD&C Act. This is our primary piece of legislation. And what the FD&C Act says is really two things. First of all, that foods cannot be adulterated. And adulterated means that they either contain some kind of a poisonous or harmful substance that is detrimental to the public health. And it also means that foods or any other products have to be prepared and packed and also held under safe and sanitary conditions. And then also the FD&C Act addresses something called misbranding. And misbranding is the label, which is actually something that appears on the product, or the labeling. And the labeling is any kind of literature or pamphlet or brochure, which is right next to that product and talks about the product. So that's one of our main pieces of legislation. We also operate under something called the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. And again, this addresses some of the same things in the FD&C Act. It again talks about the label must be accurate, it must be complete, it cannot be misleading. So we feel that these two pieces of legislation provide consumer protection, and again, they're used in enforcement actions. Now, the reason I went through all this is to kind of give you an idea of how our authority works, how we're different from the EPA, the types of products we regulate, and how this will affect the new proposals that FDA has come out for bottled water. The reason we came out with these proposals, and they are still proposals, that means they are not finalized regulations yet. They came out in January of 1993, and I have a copy of the proposal with me. I wanted to bring an extra copy to leave with you, and I unfortunately couldn't find one in my office. I tried to Xerox this for you, and the Federal Register does not Xerox very well. If you've ever tried to Xerox it, just doesn't come out. So if you want to look at the proposals, the comment period has ended, but it would probably be a good idea just to go look and see what was in that proposal. You can just go to your local library. They all have copies of the Federal Register, and again, the date on it is January the 5th, 1993, and you just ask for that, and they can show it to you. But the reason we came out with these proposals is for a number of reasons. First of all, because the bottled water industry had really grown tremendously, and there were a number of companies whose labels were not matching up with the product. They were saying, this is a mineral water, and it was really tap water. And that was very misleading to the consumer. There was also a wide variation in state definitions. I believe it's North Carolina that has a certain definition for spring water, and California has a stricter definition for spring water. So there was a big variation from state to state on what these different terms meant. So FDA came out with the proposals, and what the proposals do is really two basic things. First of all, they define a lot of the terms that we hear bantered about for bottled water. It defines what spring water is, what is mineral water, what is artesian water, all these different definitions. And it also sets new limits for approximately 50 chemicals and other contaminants. And also, one of the other reasons why we came out with this proposal was in response to a petition that was filed in 1988 by the International Bottled Water Association. And they asked FDA to please look at these issues. We had also gotten comments from a lot of consumers saying, this is misleading. We don't know what these terms mean. So that's why these proposals came out. And I have brought with me a number of handouts. The government is always accused of killing a lot of trees, and we provide too much paperwork. So I tried to bring to you today things that I thought would be really useful for you. And I brought you 2 press releases. And the press releases, what they talk about in one of the releases is the different definitions that FDA has proposed for bottled water. And the second press release talks about the contaminant levels that we have proposed to be set. So please get those before you leave, and you can take a look and kind of get the gist of the Federal Register proposal. Just kind of to touch on some of the high points of the proposal. First of all, mineral water is defined, and that's something new. Mineral water has not really been clearly defined. One of the reasons is because all water contains some traces of minerals, unless it's been distilled. All water contains it. So what we proposed is that mineral water would now only apply to water which has 250 parts per million of dissolved solids or minerals. And also, we proposed that the label on bottled water has to state if it has come from a municipal tap source. If it's come from if it's from tap water, they cannot call it mineral water or spring water. They have to state on that label that it's come from a tap water, from a tap source. Approximately 75% of the bottled water that's sold does come from protected springs and wells, but there's about 25% out there that are not truly spring water or mineral water. They aren't what they claim to be. Also, another thing we addressed is that bottled water for infants has to state if it is not sterile. Extremely important. A lot of people were buying water and just using it to mix up infant formula without realizing that this was not sterile. And you would assume it is. If you're buying it, you assume it's sterile. So it has to state on the label that it is not sterile. The final regulations should come out in about June or July. We expect to publish those. We had originally expected to publish them in April, and we received about 450 comments on the proposals. A comment is not an individual comment. A comment means that it can be from a consumer, it can be from a trade organization, from a consumer association. That's considered one comment. And what we have to do is read every single comment that comes in and address that comment in the Federal Register. So if you look at the Federal Register and wonder why it's so lengthy and so thick, that's one of the reasons. We are by law required to do that. So that's just an overview of the bottled water regulations. Okay. Do we have time for the seafood? Yeah, okay. Okay, good. I'm hoping my voice will hold out. I've had this horrible cold, and forgive me if I sound a little bit like Lauren Bacall. I think it's starting to sound like Humphrey Bogart now. But I have brought along a video that just gives you an idea of the new seafood regulations that were proposed at the, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. At the end of January. So I'll show that to you, and I have a few slides, and please ask questions if you have questions about anything. There will be a town hall meeting on March the 4th that FDA has invited many industry and consumer groups. I've contacted David about it to talk about the seafood regulations. Oh, there we go, okay.
Where is that?
The meeting is at the Weston Canal.
The truth is that most cases of foodborne illnesses are preventable, and that's what this press conference is about today. It's our job in this department to help the state and local governments and the industry to prevent them, and that's why we're strengthening our seafood safety program. Although the federal seafood program is considerably stronger than it was 2 or even 3 years ago, the systems are largely reactive. They're based on food safety practices and principles that are more than 50 years old. Those practices have failed to keep up with the changing environment. It's time for us to move from an eyeball system to a system that's truly based on science. Whether we eat out or eat at home, we shouldn't have to worry about whether our food has been transported correctly, whether it's been properly processed, whether it's been properly shipped and properly handled, and properly stored by the retailer under the right temperatures. We all know that foodborne illnesses carry a very high price, both in human terms and in dollars and cents.
It's time to overhaul the system. Today we are proposing a system of preventive controls. We are acting to head off potential problems. The system we are proposing draws its strength from one simple principle. The best way to provide safe food is to build safety into food products during the production process. Under the current federal system, food products are examined for safety after the fact. Let me close with 2 points. First, the system of preventive controls that we are proposing today may sound simple, but everyone should recognize that the adoption of a systematic and comprehensive system of controls represents one of the greatest shifts in food policy in the last 50 years. Second, we believe that what we're doing today for seafood holds enormous potential for food safety across the board. In time, the system of preventive controls may well be expanded and refined to provide American consumers with comprehensive insurance against foodborne illnesses for many categories of food.
This was made for television stations. There's a little bit after this. It's a little more interesting. Current seafood safety guidelines could be thrown overboard if newly proposed regulations are enacted. Administration officials want tougher seafood safety measures in response to concerns about contamination. From the dock to the fish market, every stage of seafood inspection would be affected under the new initiatives.
We believe that they're more preventative as opposed to reactive, and that's the whole point. The point is to make every citizen feel that when they eat a piece of fish, that it's safe.
Currently, there are piecemeal safety controls which are difficult to monitor. The new approach would ensure that firms document all vital information, everything from the amount of water pollution to the temperature of the room.
The new system that we're putting in place gives us assurances that preventive controls are being adhered to every day.
And every day, millions of pounds of fish are caught and processed. The goal now is to have it done under new regulations by the end of the year. In Washington, this is Gail Becker reporting. And this just talks about the 9 meetings that will be held around the country. The meetings are primarily geared toward industry to explain to them what the regulations we are proposing are all about and to get their comments. But I've also contacted David about the meetings. And I hope you noticed too, just one more plug for our seafood hotline. FDA does have a toll-free seafood hotline, and the number is 1-800-FDA-4010. And if you call between 12 and 4 Eastern Standard Time, there is actually a live person there to talk to. It also has an automated fax that you can request them to fax you information or to send you any number of FDA reprints for free. So it's a wonderful, wonderful service and completely free of charge to the consumer. I think I'm being kicked off.
We're going to do questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. William Hartley, who's an environmental toxicologist with the Tulane School of Public Health, Environmental Health Sciences Department.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. I guess my goal in this talk is to talk about health and drinking water. You know, you can have standards, and you can have a good enforcement program, and you can have all that in place. But what if the standards themselves aren't protective? And so that's largely the function of public health people, is to develop drinking water standards, that type of thing. And so I thought I would try to give you an honest assessment of what we know and what we don't know. Developing safe drinking water standards is both a science and an art. And the art part, I guess, is dealing with the tremendous amount of uncertainty we have about what the exact connections are between chemicals and health. Okay, Bob, thanks. Yeah. Right now we have the Safe Drinking Water Act, which it provides a procedure for developing standards. And it was established, and there have been various amendments to it, and it also uses a new science that we call risk assessment. And if you haven't heard those words, you'll eventually hear them, I'm sure, as time goes on. But risk assessment is really a process. It's a process that we take all the available data that we can get on health effects of chemicals, on toxicology, animal data, human epidemiological studies, exposure data. We put that together and try to come up with safe standards. Now, I want to point out also that the Safe Drinking Water Act is interactive with a lot of other laws. And drinking water is not an isolated thing. It comes from, it's connected to everything else. For example, the Safe Drinking Water Act is connected to the RCRA, or Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, because that act deals with safe disposal of hazardous waste. And that can serve as a major source of contamination of drinking water, is leachate from hazardous waste, for example, in the wells. Other ways safe drinking water is connected is, for example, in a law called CERCLA. I can never remember what it means, so I always say CERCLA. If you want to read it, there it is. But in any event, that deals with how we deal with abandoned and hazardous waste sites. And again, we have the same issue of toxic chemicals leaching from abandoned and hazardous waste sites into our drinking water supplies. So drinking water should be viewed in connection with other laws in terms of protection. And finally, FIFRA, Fungicide, Insecticide, and Rodenticide Act, agricultural practices play a major role in contamination of drinking water. Runoff from agricultural fields, again, and into drinking water supplies. So you need to think of drinking water in terms of a whole host of laws, not just Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, what is a safe standard? I'd like to take a vote, and then vote now and a vote at the end of my talk. How many of you expect absolutely no risk, no health risk at all from drinking water? Raise your hand. Don't be shy, we're not taking names. How many of you expect absolutely no risk from drinking water from the government, the scientists, and everybody? How many? No health risks at all. 1, 2. About 5 or 6 of you. About 5 or 6 of you. Well, I have some good news and some bad news. Okay. The good news is that the current risk assessment procedure does build in a lot of safety into drinking water. It builds a lot of safety into the standards. In other words, the standards, these list of numbers that people put out, EPA, FDA, other individuals, other regulatory agencies, these list of numbers, they were developed in a process in which scientists had a major role in looking at the information about the chemical. And in doing that, the risk assessment procedure is very conservative. In fact, there's one sector that thinks it's too conservative, that we make the numbers too low. And another sector thinks that we're not conservative enough in terms of, but there is a lot of safety built in. For example, I can tell you that roughly, when you talk about under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the procedure, the margin of safety in these standards is based on what we know, is somewhere between 100 and 1,000 fold margin of safety, depending on the level of information we have about the chemical. Now, in terms of the Safe Drinking Water Act, if you look up there, there's kind of several types of numbers that are available to the public, and I just want to make you aware of them. First of all, there's a maximum contaminant level, MCL. Now that's the law. That's the Safe Drinking Water Standard, which municipal water supplies cannot exceed. In other words, if you exceed those standards, then some action must be taken. Now, I call to you mind, when you exceed an MCL, it doesn't mean that there's a sudden really increase in health risk necessarily. Because that standard, again, has a lot of safety built into it. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, there's something called an MCLG, Maximum Contaminant Level Goal. That will be a goal that will be based purely on science if we didn't have economic and other non-science factors considered. But of course, in the government, the way it goes about developing standards must consider both science factors, science and health, economic, and just pure practicality. What's practical and what isn't practical? For example, you can't have a standard you can't measure because you can't enforce it. So there's a limit to how low you can go on a standard because you've got to be able to measure it to enforce it. So all these limitations apply. There's also the under Safe Drinking Water Act. There are also something called health advisories, and I call your attention to those as consumer. Health advisories are advice to the public, and you can get them from the EPA, for example. Health advisories provide not desirable, but kind of emergency and longer-term advice in terms of what the health effects of chemicals are and the amounts that are allowable in drinking water. A lot of people are concerned about cancer risk in drinking water. You hear cancer as being a major issue. And the reason I asked the question about how many people expect absolutely no risk at all ever from drinking water has to do with how scientists develop and develop cancer risk in drinking water. First of all, we're faced with a problem. We're faced with a problem, and the fact is that most of our data on cancer, on the cancer potential of chemicals, does not come from human data. We know a handful of chemicals that cause cancer in humans. We have that evidence of cancer in humans. A classic example is benzene, things like that, arsenic. Benzene causes leukemia, arsenic causes skin cancer. But 98% of the chemicals that you hear about when someone says they cause cancer is based on rodent data, rats and mice. And there's a whole lot of problems in interpretation of that data with regard to human cancer potential. So the scientific community has taken a very conservative approach to dealing with this animal data. It's taken a very conservative approach. The approach we've taken is what's called, I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of technical stuff here, but it's what's called a non-threshold model. A non-threshold model basically means that the only way you can have zero cancer risk in the model is to have no exposure to that chemical. So as a result of that, standards are set where the cancer risk is very low, or what we call trivial. And many people don't understand that in the consumer community. That the models that we use in risk assessment do not allow a zero risk cancer prediction if there's any exposure at all. And this is, you say, why we have this? Well, it's based primarily on what we know about radiation in cancer. That model is based on radiation. So when you hear people say the cancer risk is very low or trivial, it's because it might be helpful to know that a zero cancer risk prediction is not possible in the models we currently use. Now the MCLG here, if a chemical is a carcinogen, the MCLG, this maximum contaminant level goal, which is non-enforceable level, is automatically set at 0. In other words, the government goal will become 0 if it's a carcinogen, if it's a carcinogen in animals or humans. However, 0 is not the standard.
So what happens then in the risk assessment process is this MCLG, or this goal, is then put through a process to develop the MCL, which is the enforceable standard. And they consider things such as the cost of compliance, the cost to you, the consumer. They consider things such as just the pure practicality of treatment, the ability to treat water for this particular chemical, and also what's called practical quantitation limit. In other words, you have to have a standard that can be measured or else you can't enforce it. So these non-science factors go into the production, finally, of the MCL. And it comes up as close as possible to the MCLG. Okay. I want to point out to you that there are different kinds or levels of evidence for cancer. For example, is what's called a group A carcinogen. That means that we know that the chemical causes cancer in humans from human exposures and studies. And there are very few chemicals that fall in this category. Again, chemicals like benzene and arsenic do. Most chemicals fall in what's called a group B category, which is primarily based on on animal, they're clearly animal carcinogens. The animal data is least clear. And so, what do we do about this issue of cancer risk? And again, I don't want to overwhelm you with numbers, but if you look down to the left there, you see 10 to the minus 4, 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 6. Right now, most of the carcinogens, the standards that you have, their risk range for lifetime exposure to those chemicals, for those standards, whether they're group A or B carcinogens, is in the 10 to the minus 4 to 10 to the minus 6 risk range. That means this. It means that 10 to the minus 4 risk would be one excess tumor per 10,000 population exposed for a lifetime. And 10 to the minus 6 is one excess tumor per 1 million population exposed for a lifetime. Notice I didn't say deaths. I said excess tumors because it's primarily based on animal data. We can't say deaths because animals are tested for 2 years with a chemical and they're killed at the end of that 2 years and they look for tumors. So you can't, that's not a death rate, it's just an excess tumor rate. And the government on the whole tries to keep it closer to one. This is the thing you hear all the time, 1 in a million, the 10 to the minus 6 risk level. I think it's good that you understand that that's a very low risk level over a lifetime, which is considered 70 years, and that the model, in fact, doesn't allow, as I said, a no cancer risk prediction if there's any exposure to the type of the risk assessment model used.